Hi, thanks for joining me again for more about Orion in the Bible. We're going to look at the book of Numbers now. The prophecy of Balaam, that prophet of God who turned after filthy lucre. He intended to curse Israel, but God constrained him to pronounce a blessing instead. In a vision of God, this is what he said: "I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth." This prophecy of Balaam is what led the wise men to seek Jesus at his first advent. Now, the constellation of Orion was also known as the constellation of Jacob in medieval times, and it was even indicated as such on star charts from that period. Well, this prophecy was literally speaking of a star in the constellation of Orion that would be the sign for Jesus' coming. And the reason for that is because God the Father left his home in the Orion Nebula to bring his Son to this world. He came in the holy city with a company of angels, and from the perspective of Earth, it looked like a star in the constellation of Orion where they had come from. Now, as the city grew nearer to the Earth, that star began to move on the background of the night sky, and eventually they entered Earth orbit, and the star hovered over where the young child was. Well, as such, God the Father was hovering protectively over his only begotten newborn Son. Thus, this prophecy of Balaam shows that in Orion is where the sign is for Jesus' coming, but not only for his first coming, but for his second coming as well. The next scripture we're going to look at is in the book of Psalms, and it deals with how God handled the children of Israel after the wilderness wandering. It recounts that story in the following terms: "Therefore the Lord heard this, and was wroth. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel, because they believed not in God, and trusted not in his salvation. Though he had commanded the clouds from above, and opened the doors of heaven, and had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven," or grain of heaven. This prophecy applies at two different points in time. First of all, to Jesus' first coming, and secondly, to his second coming. In both cases, God opened the windows of heaven and sent down the bread of life, first in the form, in the flesh of Jesus Christ himself, and secondly, here just before his second coming, in the depiction of Jesus in Orion, which provides the spiritual meat, the manna from heaven, that is to sustain God's people through till his second coming. Now, this verse also speaks about the cause of God's wrath. And again, in both cases, whether we're speaking about the Jews in the time of Jesus, or whether we're speaking about the apostate Seventh-day Adventist Church today, it gives their unbelief in God and their lack of trust in his salvation as the reason for his anger. Well, we're going to look at one more passage here in this video. We're going to turn to the book of Amos. Now, the Orion constellation is also known as the hourglass, and in that way, it's defined by the four outer stars, the two shoulders, what are commonly recognized as the two shoulders, and the 2 feet. And then in the middle of the hourglass is the narrow neck, which is formed by the 3 belt stars. As such, it's comprised of 7 stars. Now, look at what Amos has to say. "Seek him that maketh the 7 stars and Orion, that turneth the shadow of death into morning, and maketh the day dark with night, that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. Here you can see that Amos is comparing the seven stars and Orion as two complementary names for the same thing, just as he describes the day being darkened and the night being lightened. Two complementary aspects of the same thing. Now, that shows how the Orion message is both joy and comfort and a guide to the penitent, offering the last hours, the last moments of grace to those who will be saved. But at the same time, it shows that God's wrath against the unbelievers is imminently coming, and just as the hourglass shows with the sword of Orion depicting the last grains of sand dropping through the hourglass, so God's wrath is coming and time is short. Now, in this verse, it also speaks about pouring out the waters upon the earth, and that symbolizes the latter rain, and the Orion message is the latter rain message. Now, this verse is also especially important because it connects the Hebrew of the Old Testament with the Greek of the New Testament. It speaks here of the seven stars, and the seven stars are a prominent symbol in the book of Revelation. We'll come to that in a later video of this series, but for now, I'm going to close this video, and I'll see you next time, very soon, in another video about Orion in the Bible. Thanks. For more information about God's clock and Orion, please visit lastcountdown.org, where you can find all the studies from the first time proclamation concerning the second advent of Jesus Christ. For the latest information from the second time proclamation, including present-day fulfillments of Bible prophecy, please visit whitecloudfarm.org, and don't forget to subscribe to our Alnitak newsletter. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channels, like us and friend us on Facebook, and share our materials on all your social networks. We hope to see you on the White Cloud soon.